A desperate woman is offered the job of a lifetime, a perfect escape into a world of wealth and privilege, only to discover that she's the final piece in a meticulously crafted trap. To understand how a woman like Millie Calloway could walk willingly into a gilded cage, you first have to understand the cage she was desperate to leave. Her desperation wasn't just a feeling. It was a physical place, a tangible weight, a constant, low-grade hum of fear that vibrated in her bones. It was this desperation, this gnawing need for any port in a storm, that served as the key, turning the lock on the Garrick's penthouse door and setting in motion a story of such intricate, twisted design that even its architect would fail to see the final, fatal flaw. To grasp the trap, you must first grasp the bait, and for Millie, the bait was the simple, shimmering promise of a normal life. The beginning of the end started with a single, innocent word. "Mama!" The sound, pure and gleeful, echoed in the pristine, cavernous living room of Amber DeGraw's penthouse. Millie froze, her hand still holding a damp sponge over the kitchen sink. She had been scrubbing the unused appliances, polishing the refrigerator, putting away dishes, mopping the floor until it was a mirror. The last load of laundry was all that stood between her and escape. But 9-month-old Olive, a cherubic, magazine-cover baby with soft blonde curls, had other plans. Millie had been keeping an eye on her, as she always did, a silent part of her job description. The vacuum had lulled the baby to sleep in her playpen, and Millie had thought she was in the clear. Now, Olive was awake, pulling herself up on the edge of her pen, her little round face a blotchy red from crying. But the moment she saw Millie, her sobs subsided, her chubby arms reaching out. "Mama!" she babbled again, this time with a grin. Amber DeGraw, already tugging on her coat and grabbing her Gucci purse, stopped dead. She had been explaining the vital importance of her impending pedicure with the gravity of a heart surgeon heading into the operating room. Now, her face, a carefully constructed canvas of foundation and powder, began to turn a dangerous shade of pink. "Did she just call you Mama?" Millie's blood ran cold. She had class in an hour, a social work lecture she couldn't afford to miss. "No," she said, her own voice a squeak of denial. "Oh my God, kid, will you please stop it?" "Mama!" Olive cried, oblivious to the storm she was brewing. Amber's purse hit the coffee table with a thud. Her features twisted into a mask of anger that would undoubtedly leave wrinkles. "Are you telling Olive that you're her mother?" "No, I tell her I'm Millie. Millie!" Millie's mind raced. "I'm sure she just gets confused, especially because I'm the one who—" She trailed off, wisely deciding not to finish the sentence. "Because I'm the one who feeds her, changes her, rocks her to sleep while you're getting your toes painted." But Olive, sweet, innocent Olive, was a tiny, babbling traitor. "Mama!" she screamed, reaching for Millie with an impossible longing. "She's not your mama," Amber scolded the baby, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "I am. Do you want to see the stretch marks? That woman is not your mother." "Mama!" the baby wailed. "Millie," Millie corrected, her voice a desperate whisper. But it was no use. She could see it in Amber's eyes, the finality of it. She didn't need to know the baby's name for her anymore. Because after today, Millie Calloway would never be allowed in this house again. She was so fired. The walk from the train station to her one-bedroom apartment in the South Bronx was a gauntlet she ran every day. One arm was clutched tightly around her purse, knuckles white. The other hand was buried deep in the pocket of her sensible black coat, fingers wrapped around the cool, hard cylinder of a can of mace. Even in broad daylight, caution wasn't a choice. It was a survival mechanism. The neighborhood breathed a constant, low threat. There were footsteps behind her now, a rhythmic slap of shoe leather on cracked pavement that seemed to be quickening its pace, matching her own accelerated stride, then gaining. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but she didn't turn around. You never turned around. You just walked faster. Past the graffitied walls, past the red fire hydrant leaking a steady, rust-colored stream into the gutter, past a black Mazda with a cracked right headlight that seemed vaguely, unsettlingly familiar. Just a car, you might think. But you know better than that, don't you? You know a threat when you see one. She hurried up the 5 uneven concrete steps to the door of her building, her keys already in her hand, a small collection of jagged metal that represented the only barrier between her and the world. There was no doorman here, no one to tip a cap and hold the door, just a dented intercom and a lock that always seemed to stick. Mrs. Randall, the landlady, had given her a stern lecture when she'd rented the place. Don't let anyone in behind you. It's a good way to get robbed or raped. As Millie fumbled with the key, fighting the stubborn lock, the footsteps grew louder. A shadow fell over her, large and unavoidable. She lifted her eyes and saw a man in his mid-20s, his dark hair damp from the city's damp air, a black trench coat pulled tight around him. A scar sliced through his left eyebrow, and a jolt of recognition, cold and unpleasant, went through her. Xavier, 2C. The man from the apartment directly below hers. He had cornered her by the mailboxes last week, asking her what she was up to, his eyes lingering too long. Right below you, he had said with a smirk that made her skin crawl. How did he know she lived in 3C? She gave a tight, dismissive nod and practically ran up the stairs, the sound of his footsteps not following, thank God. The second she was inside her apartment, she slammed the door, turned the lock, and threw the deadbolt. The series of clicks echoed in the small space, a meager symphony of security. Her stomach growled, but the need for a hot shower was more urgent. She had to wash the city off, the layer of black dust that clung to her skin, a constant reminder of the grime she was trying to escape, the physical manifestation of the stain of her prison record. She drew the blinds, a ritual of privacy, and stepped into the shower, her body tensing in anticipation. The water temperature was a fickle beast. There was a tiny, almost imperceptible range between scalding hot and ice cold, and she had become an expert at finding it. But it could betray you in an instant, plunging 20 degrees without warning. She didn't linger. As the water sluiced over her, she let the full weight of her situation crash down. Fired. The one steady job she'd had, the one that paid well enough to keep this roof over her head, was gone. The comfort she had begun to feel, that dangerous illusion of stability, had been shattered. Now she had to start over. The endless, humiliating search for work. It wasn't as easy for her as it was for most people. The popular childcare apps, with their mandatory background checks, were a closed door. As soon as they ran her name, the job prospects would vanish. No thank you, we'll be in touch. A polite, coded rejection. Nobody wanted someone with a criminal record in their home, watching their children. She had references, but they were from a time when her cleaning jobs weren't just cleaning jobs. A time she was trying to leave behind, buried deep in the past. Stop feeling sorry for yourself, Millie, she thought, the words a familiar, harsh mantra. You've been in worse situations than this and come out of it. Just then, the water temperature plummeted. An involuntary shriek escaped her lips as the icy needles hit her skin. She fumbled for the faucet and shut it off. A good 10 minutes, better than expected. Wrapped in a threadbare terry cloth robe, she padded into the kitchen, a small alcove off the main living space. It was a single multi-purpose room, a stark contrast to the sprawling, separated spaces of the DeGraw's apartment, where even the bathroom was larger than her entire home. She put a pot of water on the stove to boil. Dinner would be noodles of some variety, ramen, spaghetti, spirals. She was examining her meager options when a loud, insistent pounding rattled her door. Her body went rigid. She tightened the belt of her robe. "Millie!" The voice was muffled, male. "Let me in, Millie!" She winced. Oh no. "I know you're in there." She couldn't ignore him. Her wet feet left a trail as she crossed the few yards to the door. Peeking through the peephole, she saw him, Brock Cunningham, her boyfriend of 6 months, standing in the hallway, arms folded across the chest of his perfectly tailored Brooks Brothers suit. "Millie." His voice was a low growl now. "Let me in. Now." There was no use. She pressed her fingertips to her temples for a moment, took a breath, and then undid the locks. She cracked the door open. He pushed it the rest of the way and slid inside, his fingers immediately encircling her arm. "What the hell?" "Sorry, Brock," she mumbled, her shoulders slumping. He was, in a word, perfect. A successful lawyer with a chiseled jaw, impossibly white teeth, and a life that seemed utterly devoid of the grime and desperation that defined hers. He even had a minor, almost charming imperfection, a childhood heart condition that required a daily pill, but did nothing to diminish his strapping good health. The illness, however, had given him an eagerness to settle down that was both flattering and terrifying. "Let me take you out to dinner," he said, his anger softening. "I want to cheer you up." She shook her head. The thought of putting on clothes, of facing the world, was unbearable. "I just want to stay home and feel sorry for myself, and then maybe look online for jobs." "Now? You only just lost your job a few hours ago." "Some of us need money to pay the rent," she said, the words sharper than she intended. He nodded slowly. "Okay, but what if you didn't need to worry about the rent?" She knew where this was going. "Brock." "Come on, why don't you want to move in with me, Millie?" It was a question she couldn't answer, not honestly, because the real answer was a tangled mess of fear and shame. Fear that if he saw the real her, the her with a prison record, the her who used to be with a man like Enzo Accardi, he wouldn't want her anymore. The perfect life he represented felt like a costume she was wearing, and she was terrified of the moment he would see the tattered reality underneath. The man she kept hidden from Brock was a ghost, a phantom limb she still felt. Enzo Accardi. They had started as friends, partners in a righteous, dangerous game. Together, they had helped a dozen women escape the fists and fury of abusive men. Sometimes it was just connecting them to resources, finding shelter. Other times, they had to be more creative. Enzo had connections that could produce new identities, burner phones, plane tickets to faraway places. "You need to help everyone, Millie," he told her once, his voice full of an understanding she'd never known. "It is what I love about you." He was the one who convinced her to go back to college, to channel her fierce, protective instinct into a social work degree, to do what she loved within the confines of the law. Their partnership had deepened into a love that was as intense as it was inevitable. Then came the call from Sicily, a crackling, frantic conversation in Italian she couldn't understand. "Malata," he kept saying. "Sick. His mother had a stroke." He had to go back, even though he'd told her he could never return, that there was a price on his head after beating a powerful man half to death. Those bad people, he'd assured her, they were taken care of by other bad people. She believed him. She had to. She'd kissed him goodbye at the airport, and he'd promised to be back soon. But his mother's illness dragged on. The nightly phone calls became weekly, then monthly. An entire year passed without her seeing his face. When she finally asked him when he was coming back, the silence on the other end of the line was her answer. He wasn't. And just like that, the most important part of her life was over. She was alone again, left with a past she had to hide from everyone, especially the perfect man now standing in her apartment, a man who represented a future she felt she didn't deserve. So she kept him at arm's length, preserving the illusion, even as it was killing her. 9 interviews, 9 rejections. She didn't know what she was doing wrong. One woman had practically assured her the job was hers, then radio silence. A background check, Millie assumed. A door slammed shut. Her only option was to post ads online and hope for the best, hope for someone who didn't ask too many questions. Today's interview felt like a long shot. a man named Douglas Garrick, in a penthouse on the Upper West Side. The building itself was a Gothic fortress with many towers clawing at the skyline, a place that looked like it should be surrounded by a moat and guarded by a dragon. A doorman with a cloud of white hair and a crisp black cap held the door for her. As she smiled her thanks, that familiar, prickly feeling crawled up the back of her neck, the feeling of being watched. Her eyes scanned the street, and then she saw it, a black Mazda sedan. There were thousands just like it in the city, but this one gave her a strange, chilling sense of déjà vu. The right headlight was cracked, a spiderweb of fractures in the glass. She was certain she had seen that same car parked near her building in the South Bronx. She peered through the windshield, empty. Her gaze dropped to the license plate. New York. She took a moment, committing the number to memory, 58F321. The number meant nothing, but the image was seared into her brain. And if you're thinking this is just a coincidence, a trick of the city lights, you haven't been paying close enough attention. "Miss?" the doorman asked, his voice pulling her out of her trance. "Yes, sorry," she said, stepping into the lobby. It was like entering another century. The air was cool and still. Chandeliers and wall lamps designed to look like torches cast a dim, golden light. The low, domed ceiling made her feel as if she were walking through a tunnel into the past. After a call upstairs, the doorman used a key to grant her access to a private elevator. It creaked its way up to the 20th floor, the penthouse, and opened directly into the apartment's foyer. "Millie Calloway?" a man's voice called out. A moment later, he appeared. He was handsome in a clean-cut, wealthy way, with dark hair, a strong jaw, and a warm, eager smile. He extended a hand. "Please, call me Douglas." He led her into the living room, a space filled with furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum. Hand-carved coffee tables, bookcases from some French neoclassical revival period she couldn't name. And yet, for all its opulence, the place was spotless, not a speck of dust to be found. If she were to start cleaning, she wouldn't even know where to begin. "As you can see," Douglas said with an apologetic smile, "this place is a bit of a mess." The lie hung in the air, a small, strange crack in his polished facade. But Millie, desperate, said nothing. She sank onto the leather sofa, the material so soft and supple it felt like a sin. She could leave Brock and marry this sofa, and all her needs would be met. The conditions of the job were unusual. His wife, Wendy, was ill, a chronic illness, he explained vaguely. She had good days and bad days. She was extremely sensitive to smells, so Millie would have to use their special cleaning products. And most importantly, Wendy spent most of her time recovering in the guest bedroom. If the door was closed, she was not to be disturbed, under any circumstances. "She needs a rest," Douglas said, his eyes fixed on the closed door at the end of the upstairs hallway, a troubled expression on his face. Millie nodded, her own desperation a tight knot in her stomach. She needed this job. She would agree to anything. She would clean invisible dirt, use scentless soaps, and ignore 100 closed doors if it meant a steady paycheck. "So, Millie," he said, turning back to her, the charming smile firmly back in place, "when can you start?" And so, with a past she was desperate to hide and a future she was desperate to secure, Millie stepped through the doors of the Garrick penthouse, unaware she was walking into a story that had been written long before she arrived. Pay attention now, because every story has a villain, and for the next several chapters you will be absolutely certain you know who it is. Every bloodstain, every locked door will confirm your suspicion. But this story is not a mystery to be solved. It is a spell being cast, and these clues are not evidence. They are ingredients in a powerful illusion. Her first day, she went to collect the laundry from the hamper in the master bedroom, a large wicker basket Douglas had pointed out. She lifted the lid, expecting the usual chaotic jumble of clothes. But what she found stopped her cold. The dirty laundry was folded, perfectly folded, T-shirts in neat squares, socks paired and rolled, trousers creased. She stared at it, her mind struggling to process the sheer strangeness of it. Who folds their dirty laundry? Was this a test? A bizarre quirk of the rich? She stood there for a full minute, baffled, before deciding to just carry on as if it were normal. As she hauled the hamper down the hall, she noticed the guest bedroom door was cracked open. Just a sliver. She called out Wendy's name, her voice sounding loud in the unnerving silence of the penthouse. Squinting at the crack, she saw it, a single green eye watching her. It was there for a heartbeat, framed in the dark slit of the doorway, and then it was gone. The door clicked shut. A chill snaked down her spine. Douglas had said not to disturb his wife, and Millie, needing the job, had no intention of disobeying. She would do the laundry, make their dinner, and leave the phantom in the guest room to her silent suffering. The unease grew with each visit. The house was always eerily quiet, the air thick with unspoken things. Millie would hear faint noises from behind the guest room door, a soft cry, a muffled thump, but she forced herself to ignore them. Then came the nightgown. She was folding a delicate white nightgown, the fabric soft as a whisper with intricate lacing at the collar. And that's when she saw it. A stain. An irregular, brownish-red stain ground deep into the fabric right at the neckline. She knew that kind of stain. She had seen it before, on other clothes, in other houses. It was blood, a significant amount of it. Her mind flashed with ugly possibilities, but she pushed them away. There could be innocent explanations, a nosebleed, a cut. She tried to convince herself, even as a cold knot of dread formed in her stomach. A few days later, the pretense of normalcy shattered completely. She walked into the main upstairs bathroom, and the sight made her gasp. A bloody handprint smeared across the pristine white porcelain of the sink, as if someone had gripped it for support, their hand caked in crimson. Her eyes dropped to the floor. She hadn't seen it at first, but now it was unmistakable, a trail of small, dark droplets on the linoleum tiles. She followed the grisly path out of the bathroom and into the hallway. The specks of blood formed a distinct trail on the plush carpeting, a trail that led directly, unequivocally, to the locked door of the guest bedroom. This was it. This was the point of no return. Douglas's instructions warred with the primal scream in her gut that told her something was terribly, terribly wrong. She raised her fist and knocked on the door, the sound echoing in the silent hall. "Mrs. Garrick? Wendy?" Silence. She knocked again, harder this time. "Wendy, there's blood all over your bathroom. If you don't open this door, I'm going to have to call the police." That got a response. A scrambling sound from within, then a choked voice. "I'm fine. Don't call the police." "I want to see you," Millie insisted, her voice steady despite the frantic pounding of her heart. "Open the door for 2 seconds and I'll leave you alone. But I promise you, I'm not leaving until you do." There was a long pause, a silent battle of wills fought through a solid oak door. Finally, she heard a click. The lock turned. The door creaked open just a few inches, and Millie had to clap a hand over her mouth to keep from screaming. Wendy Garrick's face was a grotesque masterpiece of violence. Bruises in various shades of purple, green, and yellow covered her skin like a horrifying mask. One on her left cheekbone was fresh and swollen, a deep, angry purple, while others were faded, the sickly yellow of old injuries. Her lip was split. This wasn't from a fall. This was the work of fists. "It's from my medications," Wendy whispered, her voice hoarse. "I had a fall, and I take blood thinners. It makes me bruise easily." The lie was so transparent it was insulting. Had this woman looked in a mirror? Millie stared at her, at the raw fear in her eyes, a fear that went deeper than the bruises. "Listen to me, Millie," Wendy said, her voice dropping to an urgent, desperate whisper. Her bruised eyes grew wider. You have no idea what you're dealing with here. You do not want to get involved with this situation. If you know what's good for you, you need to close this door and get out of here." The words were a warning, a plea, and a threat all rolled into one. Before Millie could protest, the door was slammed shut in her face, the click of the lock sealing Wendy back inside her prison. The message was clear. Stay out of it. Mind your own business. Her decision to intervene wasn't just about righteous indignation. It was rooted in a college lecture that had shaken her to her core, a story that had become a defining parable in her life. The story of Kitty Genovese. Her social work professor, a man with perpetually startled hair and accusatory eyes, had described the brutal attack in Queens, the 38 witnesses who heard her screams and did nothing. He'd explained the concepts of the bystander effect and diffusion of responsibility, the chilling social phenomena where the presence of others makes an individual less likely to help. As Millie sat in that lecture hall, she had imagined herself looking out her window, seeing that attack. She wouldn't have just watched. She would have called 911. She would have gone outside, armed with a knife if she had to, not to use it, but to scare the attacker away. She refused to be one of the 38. Now, seeing Wendy's battered face, hearing her desperate warning, Millie saw her own Kitty Genovese. The trail of blood was the scream in the night. The locked door was the window of an apartment in Queens. And Millie Calloway could not, simply turn away and pretend she hadn't seen a thing. Life outside the Gothic penthouse continued its own complicated dance. One evening, returning to her building, she was cornered on the stairs by Xavier Marin, the man from 2C. He pressed against her, his breath hot and sour, the bulge in his pants a crude, terrifying announcement of his intentions. "Let's go inside and have some fun," he'd slurred. But he grabbed the wrong arm. With her free hand, Millie pulled the can of mace from her pocket, closed her eyes, and emptied it in his face. He screamed, a high, panicked sound, and in that moment of blindness, she shoved him with all her might. He tumbled backward down the steep flight of stairs, a sickening crack echoing in the stairwell as he landed in a heap at the bottom. The police came, but her relief was short-lived. Her prison record hung over the entire encounter. They listened to Xavier's story, that he was just making friendly conversation, and she freaked out, with a disturbingly receptive air. The encounter left her shaken, not just by the attack, but by the casual, victim-blaming dismissal of the officers. Justice, she was reminded, was not always blind. Sometimes it was just biased. Then came the first great twist in the story, the moment the past violently collided with the present. The night was set. Wendy had finally broken down, her terror seemingly overcoming her resolve to keep Millie out. She told a harrowing story of escalating abuse, of Douglas's rages growing more frequent and more violent. She showed Millie a small revolver hidden inside a hollowed-out dictionary, a last resort she was too afraid to use. She revealed her escape plan. A friend, Fiona, had a farm in Albany, a safe haven where Douglas would never find her. All she needed was a ride. Millie's purpose solidified. This was it. This was her chance to pull someone from the wreckage. She rented a car, a conspicuously, painfully red Hyundai, not the anonymous gray sedan she had reserved, and parked a block away from the Garrick's building. As Wendy, dressed in jeans and a hoodie, her face hidden by sunglasses, slipped into the passenger's seat, Millie felt a profound sense of rightness. They drove out of the city, the skyline shrinking in the rearview mirror. Hours later, they arrived at a cheap motel near Albany. Millie checked Wendy in, using her own ID to avoid leaving a trail. In the dim light of the parking lot, Wendy threw her arms around her. "You saved my life, Millie," she whispered, her body feeling fragile as a bird's. Driving back to the city under the cloak of night, Millie felt a profound sense of purpose. She had faced down a monster and rescued a victim. She had done the right thing. But as she drove, a set of headlights appeared in her rearview mirror. They drew closer, resolving into the familiar shape of the black Mazda. It pulled up alongside her, and for a terrifying second, she thought her time was up. Then the driver's side window rolled down. The face that looked back at her was not Douglas Garrick's. It was a face she knew better than her own, a face that had haunted her dreams for 2 long years. Enzo Accardi, her ex-boyfriend, the man she thought was in Sicily, the man she thought she'd never see again. He'd been back for months, he explained, watching over her, his car the source of the prickling on her neck. And Xavier? The drug bust that had conveniently landed him in prison just days after he attacked her? That was Enzo, too. He'd had a friend plant the heroin in Xavier's apartment. He'd been protecting her from the shadows, a ghost from her past, serving his own brand of justice. She drove on, her mind reeling, her world tilted on its axis, completely unaware of the role she had just played. But she was about to learn that in the world of the obscenely rich, the roles of monster and victim are not just misleading, they are a performance. Now, you need to understand something. The story you have just heard, the one of Millie the hero and Wendy the victim, was a lie. Every tear, every bruise, every whispered plea for help was an act in a meticulously staged play, and we are now rewinding the tape. We are pulling back the curtain to reveal the truth from the perspective of the story's true architect, the brilliant, ruthless playwright of this entire deception, Wendy Garrick. This is not merely a plot twist. It is a complete and total reframing of reality, a journey into a mind that saw people not as human beings, but as pawns on a chessboard of her own design. The real Wendy Palmer grew up in a tiny house that smelled of boiled cabbage and quiet desperation. She shared a bed with a sister who wet it nightly, and she wore hand-me-down coats with holes in them to a snooty private high school where girls like Madeline Edmondson mocked her poverty with casual, devastating cruelty. Her childhood was not a tragedy. It was a forge, hammering her ambition into a sharp, cold weapon. Her obsession was not with love, but with wealth, the impenetrable armor it provided, the power it bestowed. She didn't meet the real Douglas Garrick in a whirlwind romance. She met him at an art exhibit showcasing preposterous works made of shredded clothing, and she saw him not as a man, but as an opportunity. He wasn't a domineering monster. He was kind, brilliant, a little nerdy, a tech CEO with unkempt brown hair, a crooked incisor, and a fortune so vast it made her dizzy. He had missed a button on his cheap-looking white dress shirt. In fact, every single button was off by one, and he ate hors d'oeuvres with a boyish glee she found both endearing and exploitable. She didn't fall in love with him, she targeted him. Her seduction was a calculated campaign, and his affection was the prize she won, the key that unlocked the life of luxury she had always craved, the life she believed was her birthright. For a time, the performance was enough. She had the penthouse, the house on Long Island, the infinite credit limit. But Douglas, for all his wealth, was disappointing. He preferred cozy, ugly sofas to her sleek white ones. He ate Nutella from the jar with a butter knife. He had no interest in being the polished, powerful man she wanted him to be. He only wanted to be himself. And so Wendy grew bored. She found her ideal man in a furniture restoration shop. Russell Simmons was handsome, fit, and attentive. He was Douglas 2.0, the man she had hoped to mold her husband into. Their affair was passionate, reckless, conducted in hotel rooms paid for by Douglas's credit card, and eventually, in the very penthouse Douglas so rarely visited. It was a thrilling, dangerous game, and Wendy felt alive. Then, the game ended. Douglas discovered the affair. He wasn't violent, he wasn't enraged. He was quiet, hurt, and methodical. He canceled her credit cards, and he invoked the infidelity clause in their prenuptial agreement. And here is a crucial detail. The clause had been Douglas's idea all along. He had his lawyer, Joe Bendeck, pretend to insist upon it so that Wendy wouldn't feel distrusted, a subtle manipulation that revealed both his caution and his deep aversion to conflict. The clause was ironclad. If she cheated, she would be left with absolutely nothing. Her entire world, the one she had so carefully constructed, was about to be dismantled. The fury that rose in her had nothing to do with lost love and everything to do with lost capital. He was cutting her off from the money, the life, the status she'd worked so hard to acquire. That, in her mind, was the ultimate abuse. That was the unforgivable sin. The plan was born over lunch with her friend Audrey, a woman who always had the best gossip. Audrey told her a story about a woman named Ginger Howell who had escaped an abusive husband with the help of a hero housemaid. A woman named Millie Calloway, a woman with a reputation for helping battered women, a woman who was so hardcore she'd even killed a man to protect a friend and had a prison record to prove it. As Audrey spoke, the tumblers in Wendy's mind clicked into place. A housemaid with a violent past and the savior complex. She was perfect. She was the perfect pawn. From that moment, Wendy's deception became a full-time job. Her performance was flawless. She began by selling off jewelry to create a cash fund, money Douglas couldn't track. She had Russell, her lover, move into the penthouse to play the part of the abusive Douglas. She coached him relentlessly, teaching him how the real Douglas spoke, how he walked, though she had him play the part with a violent streak the real Douglas never possessed. She bought a white nightgown and stained it with fake blood from a costume shop, leaving it for Millie to find. She used makeup to create a symphony of bruises on her face, a visual testament to her supposed suffering. She instructed Millie to use special, scentless cleaning supplies under the guise of an allergy, a clever trick to ensure the doorman wouldn't see Millie carrying her own equipment and get suspicious. On Millie's first day, she'd even forgotten to unfold the clothes before putting them in the hamper, forcing her to fold the dirty laundry herself, creating another layer of bizarre, unsettling behavior for Millie to discover. She kept the real Douglas away, telling him the penthouse was being fumigated, renovated, anything to keep him from discovering the play being staged in his own home. Every detail was a brushstroke in her masterpiece of deceit. The climax was a marvel of stagecraft. She orchestrated the final, violent confrontation, with Russell playing the part of the strangler. She made sure the gun, the one she'd shown Millie earlier, was loaded with blanks. She knew Millie, with her hero complex, wouldn't hesitate. The gunshot, the fake blood pack Russell wore under his shirt, Millie's horrified reaction, it all went exactly according to plan. She sent her perfect pawn away, filled with a sense of righteous victory, never suspecting she was now the prime suspect in a murder that hadn't even happened yet. With Millie gone, the final act began. Wendy summoned the real Douglas to the penthouse under the pretense of signing the divorce papers. He arrived, looking tired and sad, his rumpled shirt and worried eyes a stark contrast to the monster she had described. He didn't want a divorce, he said. He loved her. He made one last, desperate plea. He wanted to give most of his fortune to a charitable foundation they could run together. All this money got in the way of our marriage, he'd said. We have too much. I don't even want it. And that was his true crime. In that moment, Wendy's contempt for him crystallized into pure, cold hatred. He didn't understand. He didn't appreciate the wealth she worshipped, the security she had killed for in her soul long ago. He was rejecting the very thing that defined her. It was an insult she could not bear. While Russell cowered in the kitchen, too weak to do what needed to be done, Wendy slipped the now loaded revolver from her pocket. As Douglas held out the papers, she raised the gun and fired. The sound was deafening in the quiet room. Her husband looked at her, his expression not of anger, but of a deep, sorrowful surprise. And then he was gone. With her husband's body cooling on the floor and the perfect scapegoat already established, Wendy picked up the phone. She peeled off the rubber gloves she'd worn and calmly dialed 911. The stage was set, the story was told, and Millie Calloway was now the prime suspect in a murder she didn't even know had happened. The next 48 hours were a desperate, frantic race against a clock that was ticking down to a life sentence. Millie, abandoned and framed, found herself in a nightmare woven by a master. With her one true ally, she had to fight to unravel a conspiracy so perfectly constructed that the truth itself seemed like a madman's fantasy. The interrogation room was small and airless, the plastic chairs cold and unforgiving. Detective Ramirez, a man with tired eyes and a blank expression, laid out the case against her, each piece of evidence another bar in the cell he was building around her. There was Wendy's testimony, a tearful, convincing account of a sordid affair between her husband and the housemaid. There was the expensive Oscar de la Renta dress, a gift from Douglas, found in Millie's closet, a dress Douglas had asked her to return, but for which he had never provided a receipt. There was the motel receipt from Albany, where she had dropped off Wendy, which just so happened to coincide with a business meeting the real Douglas Garrick had in the same city. And the final, damning pieces, her fingerprints on the murder weapon, which Wendy had insisted she handle for protection, and the gunshot residue on the clothes she had worn that night, residue left by the blank she had fired. The case was airtight. It was perfect. She had called Brock her one hope for a conventional rescue. He had arrived at the station, his handsome face a mask of concern. But as Ramirez unveiled the evidence, as the lies piled up, she watched the concern curdle into confusion, then suspicion, then horrified certainty. The revelation of her prison record for murder was the final blow. "I can't represent you, Millie," he'd said, his voice flat, his eyes cold. "I can't." He walked out of the interrogation room and out of her life, leaving her utterly, terrifyingly alone. There was only one person left, one number in her phone that represented a world Brock could never understand. Enzo. She made the call, her voice cracking. "I'm in big trouble." 4 minutes later, he was at her door. He didn't ask if she did it. He didn't need to. He listened as the whole insane story tumbled out of her. The two Douglases, the fake abuse, the setup. He believed her. Of course he believed her. Unlike Brock, Enzo had always seen the real Millie, and he knew she was not this person. Their strategy was born of desperation and street smarts. They had to find the man who had posed as Douglas Garrick. He was the key. Enzo, using his network of guys, began to dig. The source had mentioned that Millie had once followed the fake Douglas and a blonde woman to a brownstone in the East Village. That was their only lead. Enzo's contacts quickly identified the woman, Mary Beth Simmons, a receptionist at the real Douglas Garrick's company. And her husband? A furniture restorer named Russell Simmons. A quick search on LinkedIn brought up his photo. It was him, the man Millie had shot, the man who was supposed to be dead. And here is where our story converges, where every lie, every betrayal, every hidden motive is about to collide in a storm of blood and reckoning. Are you ready? The final act played out in a secluded cabin on a lake 2 hours north of the city, the narrative threads converging in a storm of rage and retribution. Wendy and Russell were there, celebrating their victory with champagne. But their triumph was short-lived. A call came from Douglas's lawyer, Joe Bendeck. Just before his death, Douglas had changed his will. He had left his entire fortune, hundreds of millions of dollars, to a new charitable foundation. Wendy was left with nothing. Her perfect crime had yielded the ultimate failure. Her rage was volcanic. All of it, the planning, the risk, the murder, had been for nothing. At that same moment, Millie made her final, decisive move. The name Mary Beth Simmons had sparked a memory, a connection from a past case, a woman she had helped years ago. She knew her. Pulling over on a dark street, she made a call. She told Mary Beth everything, the affair, the penthouse, the murder plot her husband was involved in. And then she told her where to find them, at the cabin on the lake. Mary Beth's arrival was the storm that broke the dam. She confronted her cheating husband and his manipulative lover. The scene exploded into violence. In a fit of betrayed rage, Mary Beth grabbed a kitchen knife and killed Russell, the man she had loved for 20 years. Then, her face a mask of cold fury, she turned to a terrified Wendy. She forced her to write a full confession, framing it as a suicide note, detailing the entire conspiracy, the hiring of Millie, the murder of her husband, her despair over losing the inheritance. When the confession was complete, Mary Beth made sure that Wendy, too, met a violent end, making the scene look like a tragic murder-suicide. Days later, Detective Ramirez sat across from Millie in the same interrogation room. He told her she was officially cleared. 2 key pieces of evidence had exonerated her completely. First, the building manager for the Penthouse had returned from a trip to Europe and revealed the existence of a hidden security camera at the back entrance, a camera Douglas himself had installed. The footage proved that the real Douglas Garrick had never once been in the apartment while Millie was working there, and that on the night of the murder, he had arrived after she had already left. The affair was impossible. The timeline was impossible. Second, there was Wendy's detailed suicide note, a full confession that laid the entire sordid plot bare. The case was closed. Millie was free. Enzo was waiting for her, and together they began to pack up her small apartment, moving her things into his, finally free from the ghosts of their pasts and ready to build a future. As they worked, the buzzer rang. It was Brock. He had come to pick up the box of clothes and belongings he had left at her apartment. The encounter was brief, awkward, a final, sad ellipsis on a chapter of her life that had slammed shut. He wished her luck and left, a handsome stranger carrying a cardboard box of memories. The case was closed, the official story written in a suicide note found in a remote cabin. But the deepest secrets, as always, remained hidden just beneath the surface, known only to the one person who had truly controlled the final outcome. Wendy Garrick thought she was the master manipulator, the queen on the chessboard, moving her pawns with impunity. But in the end, she was outplayed, outmaneuvered by the one person she had underestimated, the housemaid. Because you see, when Millie Calloway called Mary Beth Simmons that night, she did more than just reveal the affair and give her the location of the cabin. She invented a story. She told the distraught wife that Russell suffered from a minor heart condition, just like her own ex-boyfriend. She offered a piece of deadly advice, suggesting Mary Beth give Russell a dose of digoxin from a bottle she happened to have on hand to keep him calm during the confrontation. It was a subtle, untraceable lie, a masterstroke of manipulation that ensured no matter what happened in that cabin, no matter who had a knife or who had the upper hand, Millie's own unique, quiet form of justice would be served. Wendy's grand plan was a masterpiece of deceit, but Millie's was one of elegant, lethal simplicity. Because the Housemaid's Secret was never about the families she worked for. It was about the simple, terrifying truth that sometimes the only person you can trust to deliver justice is yourself.